waits, and Johnson scores! Masaba's in the middle, Wednesday here could seal it, Casimir finds Masaba! Yeah! It's now Bannon with a great ball in, here's an opportunity, Palmer scores! Liam Palmer has scored for Sheffield Wednesday!
Hello and welcome to the Wednesday Till I Die podcast. I am Matt Johnson, and tonight we bring you another special episode with Symon from the 1867 news platform on X, formerly known as Twitter, to break down the last 24 hours in the weird and wonderful world of Sheffield Wednesday. First off, Symon, before we get into it, how are you, mate? You okay?
Yeah, I'm fine. Yeah, obviously, I'm a bit shocked. I had a very busy day as a result of the news. I didn't expect to be making this podcast as early as we actually are. But yeah, it's always interesting. You can say that with Chansiri, can't you? Always interesting.
Absolutely. So again, if you have been living under a rock in related to Sheffield Wednesday news in the last 24 hours, a reminder for the context of this discussion with the recently released statements. Sheffield Wednesday can confirm a temporary issue with the payment of player salaries for the month of March. This has occurred as a result of significant sums of money owed to the chairman's businesses, which has in turn impacted on the club's immediate cash flow. The chairman is working hard to resolve this situation at the earliest possible opportunity, and in the meantime, thanks everyone for their patience and understanding. Now, before we get started, and we did say this before recording, Symon, we are both aware that this is not going to be a incredibly positive, upbeat, happy chat, because the news itself is not positive.
No, unfortunately, this is the problem. We're constantly having to report the news, and it's constantly negative news. We'd like to be reporting exciting and fun things that everyone's going to get behind and press all the likes and retweets and things because it's exciting. But yet again, we're presented with another debacle.
Yeah, and to be crystal clear for those of you who are listening to this, this is not a personal attack on the chairman himself. This is not a personal attack on anything to do with him as an individual, his family, anybody who is associated to him. We are merely commenting on the news that was recently released surrounding the running of this football club. And just to go back to that previous point that Symon's just made, hopefully at the end we'll be able to give you a more positive look towards the future. So please do stick around until the end. So, Symon, let's get into the big topic. What are your thoughts on the news that broke last night?
Well, yeah, I mean, genuinely, I don't think shocked is too strong of a word. I mean, obviously, we've been having lots of conversations online and offline about the state of the club and the finances of the club. And obviously, you hear some sort of rumours about bits and bobs of things, being untoward. But when people have asked me questions, are we in trouble? Have we got financial problems? What's going to be happening? I've been continually saying no, that we'll be fine, because lots of people have looked at the finances and they've made their assessment as to where we are, and the general consensus is that we are going to run out of money at certain points in the year. There'll be certain dips where it's going to be difficult to be able to fund it. But I don't think anybody at any stage pinpointed the end of March as being the time when we were going to be struggling. And that's the thing that's sort of been the great shock, because it doesn't add up. We should not be struggling for money where we are. I mean, if you look at our income, we're it's approximately split a third, and a third. We've got a third of matchday income, we've got a third commercial income, and a third of TV income. And it's approximately £9 million. The matchday income is slightly over, the other two are slightly under, but in the region of £9 million for each section. But obviously that's not spread evenly over the year. We don't get the same amount of money each month. You get certain tranches of payments at certain times. But when you look at the matchday income, a massive percentage of that comes from season tickets. And as you well know, as everybody else knows, our season ticket money comes in January now. We've brought it earlier and earlier, but we all duly paid our early bird season ticket before the price went up and up and up. So we got paid the season ticket money in January, possibly a little bit of it in February. But I would imagine by now, 75, 80%, maybe more than that, of our season tickets will have already been purchased. The money's already been brought in. Now, you think about that, if we've got £9 million in terms of our match day money, and a significant chunk of that is season ticket money, we must have had several £1 million come through the door in January and February. There's no way. I don't know the exact figures. We don't get the figures released, but we must have had something in that kind of region that's been able to come through the door. And you think about in terms of our commercial income, the deadline for things like the executive boxes, well, that was a couple of weeks ago, and they're best part of 40 grand a piece if you add the VAT into it. If you sell yourself, I don't know how many they've sold. I think it's an awful lot less than they're hoping to sell. But even if you only sold 12 of them, that's part of £500,000 that must have come into the club in the last couple of weeks. Significant chunks. So when you look at the 9 million of match day and the 9 million of commercial, the way we're structured it is we try to get that money in this period of time, in the first quarter of the year, towards the end of the season, ready for the following season. So if you're going to pick any quarter of the year where you are not going to struggle in terms of cash flow, you would have thought January, February, March would have been one of those most favourable months. And of course, we've had a number of home games during that particular period. So we are quite reliant upon home games for our income. But we just had the biggest home game of the year, didn't we? 30-odd thousand people turned up for the United game. And I don't know the exact split of how many of those were season tickets and how many of those were paying on the day. But there's got to have been 10 or 12,000 people that were buying match day tickets at 50-odd quid a go. Now, again, there's some of those are concessions and there's various different things in there, but you're still talking about £300,000-400,000 absolute minimum. Probably could have been anything like £500,000. So you add in the bumper payday we would have got for the United game, the bumper payday you're going to get for selling the executive boxes, any renewed sponsorship deals, and you add all of that into the season ticket money, we must have had millions of pounds going through the coffers in the last 2 or 3 months. We really shouldn't be in a position whereby we are struggling when you consider our cash flow. And just the basic things like you're looking at the sales that they've just had on with the Macron stuff. And I know they sold it at 50%, but the shop was absolutely rammed, wasn't it? And online orders, they couldn't fill all the orders. So, in terms of profit, I don't know where we are with profit, but in terms of just simply getting money through the till, we must have got a lot of money come through the till from through the shop. So you look at our major sources of income, we've had a pretty bumper time these last 3 months, and we ought to have been in a position whereby we can make the cash flow. Now, if you look at the overall costs of running the club, we're somewhere in the region of £2.5 million a month. If you add up the costs from the last year's published accounts, it's in the ballpark of 2.5 million. So you'll think about it. We've got 2.5 million for January, 2.5 million for February. So that's £5 million have been spent. But we must have had way more than £5 million came in, even if we had zero in the bank at Christmas. So the January season ticket money and all those other extra things must have been 6, 7, 8 million pounds. They've got to have been. So if we've only paid the expenses in January and February, we've only paid out £5 million. It should have been 7.5 million if we'd have made the payments for March. But according to the statement, we haven't made the payments for March. So that's where my sort of big concern comes. Who have we paid? Because we've had the money, we can document that the money has come in. We know we've paid our season tickets. We know that our executive boxes have paid. We know we've had various different commercial deals have completed. The money has come into the club and we haven't been able to pay it out. The numbers don't add up. We've had more than £5 million come in, and apparently we've only spent around £5 million going out. That worries me. That really does.
Which is understood and brings us on to the next question, which is, do you think expenses other than wages aren't being paid?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, when you look at your priorities, and again, we said this, we weren't trying to be in a situation where we're trying to bash anybody over the head. I think most people who are listening to this have been in a time in their life where they had plenty of month left at the end of the money. It happens to all of us, doesn't it? Sometimes you just can't pay all of your bills in one go, and you've got no choice but to prioritize. It happens to all of us. Happened to me sure you've been in that situation. So we're not trying to bash anybody with this. You're in a situation here where he hasn't been able to make all of the payments. These things do sometimes happen in personal life. They do happen sometimes in business. But when you're in that situation, you have to prioritize who it is that you're going to pay. Now, if you're a football club, you are required by the EFL rules to self-report when you don't pay the wages on time, or if you don't pay the HMRC or the VAT on time. So it makes logical sense that you are going to prioritize making those payments, because it's embarrassing that you haven't done it. And it's more than embarrassing when you've got your loyal staff members who are not being paid for the job they're doing. It goes beyond that. So I would have thought that any sensible business person would be prioritizing paying your staff over paying people like HMRC, paying the VAT, paying the rent, paying Macron, paying that sort of thing. You would imagine that would have been the case. So if we haven't managed to pay the cleaning lady, we haven't managed to pay the kit man and that sort of thing, and we haven't managed to pay the players, you would imagine logic says that we probably aren't paying other people as well. I mean, there was I put a tweet out a week or two ago about the thing with Macron, and I know that there was a semi sort of correction published on perhaps on behalf of the club to say that Macron are still our supplier for next season, and I believe that they probably are. You know, we're under contract. They are our current kit supplier. They are probably our kit supplier going further forward. But the fact that we are contracted to them for next season does not mean that there has not been an issue. Does not mean that there has not been a problem. I mean, Danny Rowell is contracted to be our manager for next season and for the season after. You know, we've got recruitment staff who are contracted for the next recruitment window. Does that mean that we expect them to be there in place? Does that mean we expect Danny Rowell to be there? Does that mean that there has been no problems going on behind the scenes? It doesn't, does it? So the fact that the club have come out and said Macron is still our supplier and we're discussing next season's kit, yeah, fine. I wouldn't dispute that. But I'm certainly not backing off what I said earlier on. There has been an issue. There have been problems. That is an absolute certain fact. Whether that was the sole reason for the sudden 50% sale, I don't know. But it's certainly that 50% sale coincided with the conversations with Macron about next season. And I'm reliably informed that the part of that was an awkward conversation regarding the status of this season's kit and what we're going to go and do about it. So it makes sense that if you aren't paying your players, you probably aren't paying other people as well. So I don't know anybody else that we aren't paying other than just simply, the logic of that. Are we paying HMRC? Have we paid the VAT bill? The honest answer is I don't know. How would I get to know that? The good thing about it is that we will get to find out very, very quickly, because in the same way that the wages are required to be self-reported within 2 days of them not being paid, the same thing applies for HMRC and also going to apply for any of the other of those bills. So if there was an HMRC payment due 31st of March, which is entirely possible, then we would be notified that it wasn't paid within 2 days of that. So we're recording this on the 1st of April. So you would expect to be notified on the 2nd of April, maybe the 3rd of April, if there was an HMRC payment that was due 31st of March and it hadn't been paid. So I don't know at the point of recording this if that's the case. I think to a large extent it will just depend upon whether there was a payment due. I don't know when the VAT quarter happens to fall, or even if they pay it quarterly. It may well be that it's monthly. What we can say is that any money that was due 28th of February must have been paid, because if it hadn't have been paid, it would have been reported 2nd or 3rd of March. And obviously we haven't had a report of that. We're not under embargo for non-payment. So I think we can safely say that we are up to date with HMRC at the very worst as of the 28th of February. But it may well be that as of the 31st of March, we're now in arrears. Don't know that. That's something to perhaps look forward to over the next day or two. I genuinely don't know, and I don't want to create rumours and speculation that doesn't need to be there. I'm simply saying, as of the 28th of February, we're fine. As of the 31st of March, if we get to Friday and there's no announcement, then we're probably all right in March as well.
Yeah, I think just to back up the point that you were saying there with regards to expenses, and you touched on wider staff, it's important here just to read out the Rob Staten's tweet, who Rob Staten is obviously linked to BBC Radio Sheffield, covers a lot of the football heaven stuff. Rob Staten, 6 hours ago, as of this time of recording, wrote the following: understand Sheffield Wednesday's cash flow issues impacted non-playing staff as well as the players. So yeah, just to back up a little bit what you've said there, this is also being reported not just by me and yourself, two blokes who sit on the internet talking. This is being reported by respected news journalists who cover these football clubs inside and out as well. So we've
the
talked
ticket
on...
office. Just add to that the staff from the ticket office, I'm quite certain, have been paid.
Mm-hmm.
I was sent by somebody who says he's the brother of the assistant kit man, and he's being paid. So some people obviously are getting paid. I don't know on what the criteria is. I don't know whether there's part payments for other people. I don't know the details about the players and that, but obviously some people have been paid. I'm quite sure that the ticket office have got sorted out. So you would imagine that if money sort of drips through into the club, that there'll be a priority list of people getting paid in the meantime.
Of course.
So it's not that nobody's been paid. I know that some people already have.
Yeah.
But there's plenty of people other than that. I mean, I don't want to go down the road of rumours, but somebody has very reliably informed me that there may well be some issues in terms of the food stocks when you go to the match on Saturday. Have a little bit of a look in the kiosk and see just how well stocked that is. It may well be that some Alistair might have had to go down to Macro with his credit card and try and help out a little bit. I don't know. It'll be interesting to be able to see where we go. I don't know how bad it is. So I wasn't expecting this. I don't think anyone was expecting this. But then people sort of come out and say, well, now it's come out. There's a bit of an issue here. There's a bit of an issue there. There's all manner of different things that probably need to get paid for as part of the club that are probably going to be less of a priority than paying the staff. So I can imagine it's possible that there are other people that have also not been paid.
Yeah.
One thing just want to mention before we move on from that point. I know a lot of people have said it, and I am probably repeating things. Is it possible that the players can put their notice in for breach of contract? And more particularly, can Danny Roll do that? Because that was a sort of a fairly hot topic. We're all looking at the compensation that may or may not be due if he was to leave. I'm not an employment lawyer, but I have spoken to somebody who is, and I'm reliably informed that the regulations seem to be, and this is FIFA regulations rather than anybody else, that if a player is not played for 2 months in a row, he's in a position whereby he can give the club notice to be able to sort it out, and they got then 15 days to be able to make the payment. If the payment isn't made within 15 days of being issued with notice, at that point that's a sufficient breach for them to be able to walk away from their contract. So my understanding of that is, assuming that the players haven't been paid right now, if they were also not paid by the end of April, so that's sort of 3.5 weeks' time, they could then issue notice, and they would then, 15 days after that, they could then walk free from their contract. Again, that's based upon what the legislation appears to say and what we're assuming people's contracts will say. I can't be absolutely certain that that's the case, but that does appear to be true. And that was the case back in 2021 when players weren't paid for quite some length of time. I know that at least one or two of the senior players did actually go down the road of putting in their 15-day notice. And as I understand it, they were paid within that period of time. So this has happened. There is a precedent for it. Unfortunately, some of the players who were there at the time of putting their notice in back then are still the same players who may well be faced with that same choice this time around. So I think that's the way that it will go. Can't be absolutely 100% certain, but it seems to be that's where we are. If you ask me, do I think it'll go down that road? I think I'm going to have to say no. I'd be pretty certain that won't be the answer. I can't imagine that this is going to drag on. You think about the disaster that would be if you got the few assets that we've got left on the books, including the manager, if all of those were allowed to just simply walk away free right at the end of the season and the absolute peak time for advertising their services elsewhere. I can't imagine that Mr. Chansiri is going to allow the situation to develop or to deteriorate that much that he ends up losing all of his remaining assets. I don't think that will happen.
Yeah, because that, as you were saying, that 2 week, sorry, not the 2 week, the 2 month window does take us through until the end of the season, and as you rightly say, takes us through to what is affectionately known as
Middle of
silly
May,
season.
effectively.
Yeah, silly season, really, in terms of you can start shopping yourself around a little bit. Yeah,
Yeah,
perfect.
unfortunately, if it went that way, the timing would be perfect. That's
Yeah,
if Southampton happened to be looking for a new manager, it would probably be somewhere in the region of 15th of May. So
yeah,
the last thing in the world you would want would be
yeah,
us having a manager with no contract and able to walk for free on the
yeah.
15th of May. That would be unfortunate timing, to say the least, wouldn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk about another unfortunate potential of this then. How likely is administration, a word that gets bandied about an awful lot and a statement that gets thrown around far
Mm.
too inconsequentially, I would probably say, in terms of people just band it around and just go, oh, well, that's it, we're going into admin. And it
Yeah.
becomes a throwaway statement rather than actually thinking of how drastic an impact it is on
Mm.
and how much of an impact it has on a club. So, a blunt question in how likely is
Mm.
it that we go into administration?
My answer has always been and will remain not likely.
Mhm.
I really don't think that's the answer. I don't imagine. I can't see a string of events that cause that to come about. I mean, the truthful answer is it ought never to be even a question, did it?
Of course.
We, we never should be asking this and thinking about it, and it ought to be ridiculous if anybody ever says it. But the unfortunate position we find ourselves in, it's not really a ridiculous question. It's something that you kind of are obliged to be able to discuss, and you're obliged to be able to answer because people are worried. But yes, you're right in what you're saying. It really is the nuclear option. Everybody loses.
Mm.
The club will lose, the fans will lose, and Mr. Chansiri will lose. He would lose effectively everything that the club is worth. And there's no way it will go down that road because the club still has value. So in order to end up in administration, there's two main routes that you're going to be in that road. Number one is that the directors voluntarily asked for an administrator to take over the running of the club's affairs. Well, we only have the one. We have Mr. Chansiri, and he's not likely to call in the administrator. There'd be no point for him doing that. It wouldn't be in any way to his advantage to be able to do that. So that's not going to happen. So then the other option is that the creditors may well put in a liquidation notice, and they may well put in a winding up order as a result of unpaid debts. But the creditor that Sheffield Wednesday have to the tune of about £150 million is again Mr. Chansiri. So he's not going to wind up his own company in order to be able to force himself to pay his own debts. It doesn't make any sense at all. It's never going to happen. And whilst ever he remains the only significant creditor, you wouldn't imagine that's ever going to happen. The other creditor that may well arise and may well put the club into administration, of course, is HMRC. If he doesn't pay the VAT or if he doesn't pay the tax, the wages and the national insurance and that kind of thing, HMRC will not hang around. They will put you into administration. They'll issue a winding up order if they feel that's a necessary thing to do. But as we just said 5 minutes ago, as of the time we are recording, there's no evidence to suggest he owes HMRC anything at all. He's probably up to date, and if he's not up to date, he's out of date by 1 day. Currently, the worst case scenario is he should have paid them yesterday, and he hasn't done as of now. So, in terms of them wanting to issue a winding up order, we are quite some time away from that ever happening. It's 6 months away as a minimum, and they would always look to work with the club. Always look to work with someone to find a way to be able to get around it. They're not in the habit of just simply willy-nilly throwing around winding up orders. That doesn't help anybody. So in terms of administration, no, I don't think that's likely to happen. That's not going to be the answer. If it did happen, we would be in the same sort of scenario as Derby County were when they end up in administration, in that you would have an administrator who would be running the club and they would be looking to find a person to be able to buy the club. And then that person would have to simultaneously buy the stadium, because obviously the stadium is not owned by the club, and it would be Sheffield Wednesday Football Club that went into liquidation, and it wouldn't be Sheffield 3, and they would be the ones that own the club. Complicated situation as to how that would work out, because there is a charge over the Hillsborough for £60 million, or at least there was the last time I checked, because although Mr. Chansiri has bought the stadium, he hasn't paid for it. That seems to be the financial information that's publicly available. So how that would actually work out, I'm not entirely certain. But if it worked out the way that it went with Mel Morris and at Derby, he sold Pride Park Stadium for, I think it was £22 million, and the club was sold by the administrator for a package that totaled £33 million. So I think it was 55 million altogether. They had to do two separate deals, but they were done simultaneously. Just one thing to add about that: people say, "Oh well, he'll hold us to ransom. He'll not allow it." That's not going to happen. A Hillsborough Stadium is worth absolutely nothing if it's not tied together with Sheffield Wednesday Football Club. You can't sell the stadium separate to the club. There is a protection order which has been put in place by the Supporters Trust. Very prescient, very well done, I've got to say, for doing that. But they put that Supporters Trust put the protection order in there, so it's I think it's called an asset of community value or something words around that, and it means that you couldn't sell Hillsborough and sort of demolish it and put houses or flats on it. That cannot be done. So the value of Hillsborough outside of the club is negligible, and it's got a mortgage charge against it for £8.7 million as well. So if it was only worth maybe 12-15 million pounds as it stood, you've got to pay the mortgage off. The equity within Hillsborough is negligible, and you can't sell it to anyone other than the club. So in terms of holding people to ransom, the way Ken Booth did over at Rotherham when he owned Millmore and didn't own the club, I don't see that being a likely possibility either. You just simply be cutting off your nose to spite your face. Great. And I don't believe Chansiri is going to do that anytime soon either. So administration, I don't think is likely. It would be a nightmare scenario. I'm not worried about that at all, not really.
Okay. How does this affect the takeover prospects? Because previous two podcasts when you've been on, Simon, we've discussed all the potential buyers that there are out there for this football club, without naming any names, obviously, because at this stage we are just talking, and there are things that you are simply unable to say, which is completely understandable. From your understanding, how does this affect those prospects?
I always get to this point and then I have to start I like to say things direct and I like to say things straight and I like to tell things honestly. But like you say, I've got my hands tied behind my back to a little extent. And the answer I'm going to give you is, number one, it means a sale is significantly more likely. Mm-hmm. And number two, it means a sale is actually significantly less likely.
Yeah.
So if I can,
so we've got the sum total of a circle there, Simon. Yeah.
Yeah, but I'll explain why both of those things become true.
Yeah.
Obviously, we've been discussing the prospect of a sale, and obviously, the last time I spoke to you, I was explaining that the main stumbling block was Mr. Chansiri and there being some degree of reluctance to come forward, and there being some sort of reluctance to come forward with a price that was reflecting the actual market value of the club. So this situation makes it significantly more likely that he's going to come to the table and he's going to sell the club. I was expecting the next time we had a conversation, it was probably going to be around movement in the actual takeover. But obviously, this is kind of we've slipped this podcast in extra, so it wasn't really going to be a takeover podcast. I can say that things are definitely happening in the background. I am absolutely certain now that Mr. Chansiri is very, very seriously considering the prospect of selling the club. Mm-hmm. I don't think it's appropriate to say more than that, but he's definitely considering the prospect of selling the club. But of course, if he does decide that that's what he's going to do, he's going to sell it in the style in which he sells everything, which is probably not going to come forward and say, look, here's a fair price. You make me a fair price and hold out your hand. Let's have a deal. Yeah. It's not going to be done on that basis. So I'm quite certain that he is much more convinced that the club must be sold. And there is very clearly, we can see now, we're not gossiping behind anybody's back. There is clearly a need to sell the club. He's clearly struggling. He clearly is struggling to be able to make ends meet. He needs to do something about it, and he probably needs to do something about it a little bit faster than we were giving him credit for. We thought he probably got a little bit more time to be able to drive up the price and hold out for a deal on his terms. But the evidence of the last couple of days suggests that he might actually be in a much weaker position than perhaps he was advertising, and perhaps even we thought he was in. So that makes a sale significantly more likely, because that suggests that the stumbling block is much more likely to be removed. So that's good news.
Yep.
However, it also makes the sale a little bit less likely, because if you were a buyer and you were interested in buying the club and you were trying to negotiate a deal with Mr. Chansiri, and he quite rightly wants as much money as he can get for the club, and you were wanting to buy the club at the best price you could negotiate, you were looking towards doing a deal. When you suddenly see news like this, you can't help but realize that his position is becoming weaker and weaker. You can't help but realize that there is the possibility that if you waited for a month or 2 or 3 months, that the position Mr. Chansiri is in is going to be significantly weaker than it is today. Mm-hmm. The price of the club is not going up, is it? The price is going down. And I think you've got to answer honestly, and I don't want this to be the case, and I'm sure you don't, I'm sure the fans don't, but let's be honest about it. There's every chance the club's worth 10, 15, 20 million pounds less if we wait until the summer. Mm-hmm. Because there's a lot of more crises that are sort of sitting there on the horizon. And again, we didn't want to come about this bashing people, and we absolutely don't want to come upon wishing harm upon anybody. We want this to be done amicably. We want this to be done fairly. We want this to be done for everybody's best interests. But the reality of the situation is people who are buying this club are not daft. And if they can save a significant amount of millions by sitting and waiting just a little bit, what are they going to do? What would you do?
Yeah.
I wouldn't want to jump.
Just to touch on that there, Simon, because you've talked about kind of like some rough figures there, and obviously this stuff that's coming on the horizon. If I could press you for what you think a rough valuation of the club, and we are talking rough here, I'm not talking like specifics, it doesn't need to be down to the last counted penny, but we sat on here and discussed in our first episode what Sheffield United were sold for. Take off a chunk of that and you were probably in the ballpark.
Yeah.
In the last 6 months, to be October, November, December, January, February, March, 6 months, we've had 2 issues where there have been non-payments, one to HMRC and one to currently playing staff and staff, according to local journalists. That is going to have, as you rightly say, potentially a significant impact upon anybody who's potentially buying the club. So, difficult question. What is the value of the club?
Good question. And this is why I was saying on the last podcast about there being a window of opportunity. There's a window of opportunity in so many different ways. And there is a window of opportunity for Mr. Chansiri to walk out with his head held moderately high. And there is an opportunity to walk out shaking hands and amicably. There is also an opportunity to be able to walk out having got the best price he's ever going to get for the club. And the way he's going to go about that is by selling it as a going concern, as a solid championship club that is either in the playoffs or very close to the playoffs, that has real prospects of going somewhere next season. That's how you're going to get the maximum value for the club. And as we're speaking, last week that was the case. You were selling yourself a solid championship club that was chasing the playoffs. With 8 games to go, what could happen? Now we're in a situation where the playoffs look highly, highly unlikely. So that has some impact upon the value, because there's no prospect we're going to be a Premier League team this season. There's no prospect of making a big playoff run down to Wembley and having the money spinning effect of that. That's not going to happen. So that does affect the valuation. And now we're in a situation where we are looking at a potential distressed sale. And if you get to the point where it's a distressed sale, where the valuation just simply goes down and down and down. So you think about, for example, West Brom. West Brom were a club that were, in many ways, you would have thought in a financially better position than us, but they were effectively a distressed sale. And I think they were about 60 million pounds, something in that kind of reason. They had issues in terms of payments. Sheffield United, I think, probably could have been sold for slightly more money than they were sold if the owner could have managed to hold it on a little bit longer, but there were pressing issues as to why he needed to sell. And I think he could have driven the price up a little bit better if he'd have had the chance. So a distressed sale is a significantly lower sale price. So the window is closing. The window that was there 2 weeks ago when we discussed it has closed a little bit since the time when we discussed it. And if we end up in a situation whereby we are of a 3 window transfer embargo, Well, how does that impact the value of the club? Anybody who wants to come along and buy it and they want to invest in the squad aren't able to do so for the next 18 months. You've massively decreased your value of the club, because a buyer can't come in and turn things around. They're going to have to come along and make do with the squad that we've got. And let's be honest, we've got no manager and we can't sign people. Then we're in a relegation scrap. Then you run the very real risk of buying yourself a League One club, which is worth significantly less than a Championship club. So the problem that we've got is that every single thing that is happening at Sheffield Wednesday is dropping the value of the club down, which is why I said 2 weeks ago, Mr. Chansiri, don't drag this on. Do this while there's a window of opportunity, because your best price is to strike the deal now. The longer you wait, the less it's worth. So I don't know is the answer. There is obviously a bottom price. So Derby County, I think, is a very, very good comparison. They were sort of 30 million quid in administration in League One. We're not ever going to be worth less than that. And bear in mind, that price didn't include Pride Park. I can't see we're going to be worth less than that. So you're never going to pick the club up for pennies. That's not going to happen. Anybody who thinks we're going to come along and give the administrator £1 and take over, that's not going to happen. We're always going to be worth significantly more than that. But in terms of the type of money I think Mr. Chansiri would like to get for the club, you're only going to get that if we're on a solid footing, and we're just not. So I think somewhere in the region of probably half what Sheffield United were worth, I think that's probably reasonable. Somewhere in the region of what Derby County sold for, something in the region of what West Brom sold for. We're a similar sort of size to them. If you look at assets, Hillsborough, Pride Park was £22 million. What would you buy, Pride Park or Hillsborough? You're significantly better than Hillsborough. Hillsborough's crumbling. It's worth half of Pride Park. I don't know, 15 million probably. At the very best, 12 million probably is probably fair, and it's £8.7 million mortgage on it. So Hillsborough, realistically, 5 million quid is probably the net asset. It really is as bad as that, and that's when you bear in mind it probably needs £3 million spending on it to be able to get it through. We'll talk about that in a minute. There's a lot of money needs to be spent on Hillsborough immediately. So if you say there's £3 million worth of remedial work, you're down to a net equity of about 2 million quid. It really is as low as that. It sounds ridiculous, but that's where we are. You look at the squad value. Squad value is worth a few £1 million, but not a fortune. And we've got the very real prospect that by the 15th of May, the squad value could be zero. They could all be walking away for free if we can't sort out this payment issue. So you might be in a situation where the asset value of Sheffield Wednesday could be almost nothing in as little as 6 weeks' time. That really is the reality. So then you got to say, well, what are you buying? What anybody's buying is basically you and me. We said this before, didn't we? We've got 25,000 people who will turn up and pay good money to watch the club, no matter what happens, no matter what division you're in. That's worth a lot of money. You've got another 25,000 people who will turn up several times a season, and you'll be able to get some income from them. They'll buy a shirt, they'll buy half a dozen tickets to games, they'll bring the wife and the kids or the family or the husband or that sort of thing. They're worth a chunk of money. And there's probably another 25,000 people who are nominally Sheffield Wednesday fans, but don't come to matches very often and aren't really producing much income from Sheffield Wednesday, but they have some kind of value. That's what you're buying when you're buying the club. You're buying us. And you think about it, we're probably worth, in real terms, your 25,000 hardcore fans are probably worth about £1,000 each. So probably about 25 million quid, something in that region. And your other fans who come part of the time, probably 300, 400, 500 quid a piece. There's a few £1 million worth there because we'll buy season tickets. We always will. And we're always going to do so. So this is something I said last time about the fans. We need to understand when someone comes along, they're not buying Hillsborough. They're not buying players with no asset value. They're buying you and me. We're the ones who actually have a serious value here. We're worth a lot of money to anybody who wants to be able to come and buy it. So in terms of value, there is a bottom price, which it's never going to get below. And anybody who thinks they're going to buy it for peanuts is sadly mistaken. There's also an upper price, which it's never going to get above. We're never going to get to 100 million. It's not worth that. Never going to be. And you can ask for 100 million all you like. You can try and get the Arab Saudis involved and go to Riyadh and try and get them to be able to bring some money, or Bahrain or wherever you're looking for a sovereign wealth fund. None of these people are daft. They're not buying Sheffield Wednesday for £100 million. It's just simply not worth that. It's probably worth something in the region of 40, 50. you might get 60. If you get a bit of an auction, you might get a tickle more than that. But it's not really worth much more than that because we're in a poor state. It's in a parlous state and there's no assets that are of any value.
I know we're going to come on to this, Simon, just to touch on that. There was a host of clubs who you mentioned there. The other club that I would like to mention here, because this is obviously what you were talking about with regards to stadium improvements to Hillsborough and what is potentially coming in the next couple of months here, is Birmingham City, who were bought around this time last year. I know it was a couple of months back, but this was a club who were, at the time, seen as a stable championship club. They were dropping like a stone, but they weren't in the relegation zone at the time of the takeover.
The Americans, unfortunately, who bought the club, and that's what they caused the problem.
Yeah, they weren't in the relegation zone.
You need to have local people who understand local football and can point out what needs to be done. But yes, they were a stable club, similar to Sheffield Wednesday, weren't they?
Stable club who also had a stadium that was in disrepair. Very similar to Hillsborough. They closed all of the bottom tiers, for anybody who doesn't remember, for a significant amount of years, and that just remained shut for a number of years. And actually, it was very weird watching games at St Andrews where the bottom stand was just covered with advertising boardings, where they hadn't opened it. And inside of 6 months of taking over that, as you say, this was a club that went through the trapdoor and went into League One. Now, of course, they've been able to rebuild. There's been some outstanding plans that have come through it, and some wonderful suggestions surrounding not only regeneration of the football club, but actually also regeneration for the city. However, as you say, we're talking a figure here and a region between anywhere from 20 to 60. And again, I think as you've pointed out there, it is very clear to see that with the news of this week and the news in the last 6 months, that price is only dropping. So moving on, how do you see things playing out in the next few months?
Well, this is where I'm back to being the doommonger again. So I'm going to apologise, but I'm just simply I'm laying it out as I see it, because I think it's something that fans need to know, fans need to understand. When they're assessing the situation, you need to know the reality. And we dealt with the reality in the first podcast where we talked a bit about finances. We talked a little bit about how people were being treated and how the club was being run, and how we were looking at our players and how we were looking at our relationship with people. So I just wanted to do a little bit of things that are off the field and regulatory issues which we haven't dealt with before, just to let fans understand the reality of the situation in that particular area as well. There's a lot of black clouds that are there on the horizon, got to say. Some of those for the club in general, and some of those for Mr. Chansiri specifically. So I'll talk about them in some kind of order. First thing is, it's now the month of April, and April is the time when the Safety Advisory Group are going to do their walk around. They're going to do their inspection on the stadium. Now, the Safety Advisory Group have got some stick from fans in the past, and I'll be honest, I've been critical of some of the things that they've done. I felt that they were perhaps not helping the club. They were trying to put the club down and trying to cause issues that perhaps weren't there. I've now had the opportunity to be able to see the documents. I've seen the structural engineer's report. I've seen the surveys that have been done. I've seen the estimates for the work that needs to be done. I've sat there and read through all of the documents. So I've seen for myself the concern that is there for the stadium. So where previously I was happy to dismiss it and say, no, it's fine, you're just making it up, it's perfectly okay, all stadiums are a little bit like that, I've had to change my mind. So everyone's heard the rumours about the North Stand, and there being issues about the North Stand. It's not just a conspiracy theory. It's not just rumours that are unfounded. I've seen the report. I've seen the information. There are serious issues, and there are issues that need to be addressed, and there are issues that I've spent some time trying to find out the answer to. Have we actually addressed these issues? Because I've seen the report from the structural engineer where the North Stand was signed off, but it's hard to be able to tell the tone of it, but it seemed from what I could see somewhat reluctantly and on a short-term time. And that sign-off kind of ended in February, and we're sort of sat here in April. I can't see what's happened. I mean, I'm assuming somebody else another structural engineer must have been employed to come and look at it again and sign it off for the extra period of time. But so far as I can see, the documents I've seen ran out in February. And I would hate to imagine that we are still hosting football matches with a safety certificate that is anyway invalid. So I don't know. I'm assuming that there has been some work that's been done that I'm unaware of. I know of engineers that didn't do the work, and I know of contractors that didn't do the work, and I'm not aware of anybody who actually did. But I'm happy to say that I'm assuming somebody must have, because I can't imagine anybody would have just simply ignored the very serious issues and just carried on hosting football matches at the stadium. If ever there's a stadium anywhere in the world whereby we must not play fast and loose with safety certificates, then it's Hillsborough Stadium.
100%.
So that's a very real problem. There are issues with the concrete, with its deteriorating. It's an old stand. When was it built? The 50s, was it? 50s, 60s. You know, some of it dates back. You know, it's significantly older than me, and I know how my structure is going these days. And the North Stand is definitely showing its age. There are issues with the concrete. There are problems that need to be addressed. There are issues with the steel, the rusting issues and decay issues and structural issues with the steelworks in the stadium that need to be addressed. And a lick of paint isn't going to cover it. It definitely needs a lick of paint, but that isn't going to fix it. There are issues that have been highlighted that need to be dealt with, and I can't find evidence that they have been. There are other issues like the roof. Obviously, the roof needs to be sorted. The guttering has gone. The lighting is a problem. But these are all relatively minor things. I'm not imagining the roof is going to collapse, but the concrete and the steel kind of need to be done. And that's a very, very, very real concern of mine from the information that I've seen. So I don't know where the situation is. I've heard the rumours. I've now seen the evidence. There is reason for people to be concerned. The Safety Advisory Group, it's public knowledge, are doing a walk around of the stadium to inspect all of those things, and they're doing it in April. It's about to happen. There is a possibility, and I don't want, again, I'm acutely aware of not just simply spouting unfounded rumours. It is not off the table that it could be shut down. It's not off the table. It's not off the table that the capacity could be reduced even further. I mean, we've all seen the white tarpaulin, which has to be put on there. We're not allowed to sell those seats. The capacity just goes down and down and down. There is potential for all manner of different things. And as I said at the beginning, I'm not a structural engineer. I'm absolutely not an expert. I'm just simply a person who's read a structural engineering report, who's talked to people who are involved in the work, just to simply try and get myself abreast of the situation. It is a problem. It needs to be addressed. I can't find evidence that it has been addressed. It might well, in a worst case scenario, we might find that the North Stand isn't usable next year, and the season tickets that we've sold aren't able to be actually used. Do I think that's going to happen? Probably not. You'd like to think not, you know, but we've been getting around it. We've been hoping for the best. We've been putting it off and kicking the can down the road for years and years and years and years. And it doesn't seem that Mr. Chansiri has taken it seriously. And now we are in a position where we know full well he doesn't have the money to do it. It looks to me like it's £2-3 million to sort out. It's certainly a few £100,000 just to simply paper over the cracks. If we can't pay the players, have we got the money to be able to do that? I suspect the answer is probably no. Serious issue about to arise in April. I don't know how that turns out. Just letting people understand, because I know I've heard the rumours. That's the reality of the situation. So that's number one issue. Number two issue, which is the EFL. I've been told today that the EFL are already talking to the club about the current situation. Obviously, EFL have been made aware of it, and they have already started to contact the club to enter into discussions. I'm not going to pretend I know what the discussions were, but I certainly am aware that discussions have taken place today between the EFL and the club. So the club is very, very much on the radar of the EFL. And the reason why that's significant is because the EFL are in a position right now where they have become under some serious scrutiny themselves for not acting. Obviously, the Reading situation has really, really spiraled out of hand. Excuse me.
No, of course, mate.
Has really, really got to a bad situation. And you'll be aware, I think it was it the middle of last week, they finally were able to have Dai Young struck off as not a fit and proper person. The phrase fit and proper person has been replaced by a different term. I I can't remember the term for it, but it's the same thing as the fit and proper person. They finally got him in terms of the financial situation, that he wasn't fit, and they forced him to sell the club, divest himself of his assets. They've been trying to do that for quite some period of time. Now, the Reading fans obviously are very upset about what happened with Mr. Young. Actually, his surname is Dye, and he's actually Mr. Dye, isn't it? It's actually Young Dye. I don't know why his name gets the other way around. I think his surname is Dye. But anyway, the Reading fans were very unhappy with the owner, but they were also simultaneously very, very unhappy with the EFL. They felt let down by the EFL. They felt that the EFL should have acted and didn't. And they felt that they consistently gave warnings to the EFL and they didn't act upon them, and that they should have done something about it earlier, and all they did was punish the club. The EFL are very aware of that, and it's a hot topic at the EFL at this moment in time. So you mentioned Reading to the EFL and it gets people's heckles up. They do not want to find another scenario like that. So when the EFL find a situation where they have an owner like us, where we are not paying, and we are constantly not paying, we are constantly under embargo, where there are constant problems, the EFL are very, very much that they are looking into this situation. Now, the regulations have changed of recent times. We all remember the fit and proper persons test, and we kind of associate that with when somebody buys the club. You have to be able to demonstrate that you don't have a criminal record and provide your accounts and that sort of thing. But that fit and proper persons test has been expanded, and now you have to pass it every year. So in the summer, Mr. Chansiri is going to be obliged to submit his accounts to the EFL, and he's also going to have to submit a business plan to the EFL to show how he can fund the club for the next 12 months. Now, the EFL are going to be obliged on this occasion to ask some awkward questions. They won't be able to just simply take his word for it that it's okay. So when he submits his accounts, the auditors always puts a note in the accounts that says basically the club's insolvent, and the club there's a risk that the club would not be able to continue without the financial backing of Mr. Chansiri. Well, the auditors can do that. They can take that on advice from Mr. Chansiri. The EFL are not going to just be able to take his word for it. They're going to need to be able to see receipts. They're going to need to be able to see bank statements, checks and balances. They're going to want to know exactly where is the money coming from. Now, the problem Mr. Chansiri has got himself in is just yesterday he has submitted his statement which says that it is not in his power to run the club, because he has said yesterday that when other people, third parties, don't pay him money, that means that he can't put money into the club and therefore he can't pay the players. Well, that's not acceptable by EFL rules. He can't have a situation that's outside of his control, that if third parties don't pay, he can't pay. That's not acceptable. And if he submits a plan to the EFL that is based upon that he loosely has these other companies that sometimes get paid, sometimes don't get paid, happens in business, all the excuses that we've all heard. If he submits something along the lines of the statement that he made yesterday, he's admitting to the EFL that he's not a fit and proper person. He's admitting that he cannot sustain the club, that he cannot run the club for the next 12 months. And if he does that, the EFL are obliged to say that he can't continue on that basis. They are obliged to do something about it. Because if they don't do something about it and it goes down the Reading road, it's the EFL that's going to pay the price for that. The EFL that's going to be on the hook and say, why did you not do something when he told you that he couldn't afford to run it? He advertised the fact. He made a statement that it's not in his control. It depends upon other people paying him. So there's a very, very real pressure that is going to be applied to Mr. Chansiri this summer when he submits his accounts. The EFL are going to want to see receipts. And it seems to me, based upon the statement that he made yesterday, he will not be able to provide that. He will not be able to provide assurances. And that raises the prospect that maybe the EFL will say, well, in that case, we don't see that we can approve your accounts for the remaining 12 months. Because they do not want a championship club to start the championship season and not be able to complete it. They do not want to have to pick up the pieces whereby the players aren't getting paid. They do not want him to be making commitments to pay transfer fees to other clubs and then find he can't pay the transfer fees. The EFL are very, very much in their interest to not allow this situation to get out of hand. So that's a big problem. potentially, as I understand it, unless he can come up with something different to what he came up with last night. I think he's just shot himself in the foot. I think he's just given a massive red flag to the EFL. I think he's just told the EFL that they need to disqualify him. I think that's what he did. That statement last night, I think, was as serious as that. That's a big problem. That's problem number 2. Unfortunately, there's another one. Problem number...
Sorry, Simon, I couldn't help but laugh. I was wondering how long we were going for this list.
Sorry. You're making me laugh, and it's not a laughing matter.
It's not a laughing matter. No, I'm well aware that it's incredibly serious, but
it did sound silly. I'm genuinely, I'm not trying to make light of the matter. I'm trying to explain the situation, and it is a serious matter. So I'm going to take a drink of water, and I'm not going to laugh. Sorry, I genuinely do apologise. It's inappropriate.
Don't you apologise, Simon. That's me who set you off.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, so problem number 3, independent regulator. Now, I'm sure most fans are aware that the government set up an independent regulator. They've been trying to do this for a long time, and the independent regulator, the bill to bring that into law, went through the House of Lords. I think it was last week.
Yes.
And it passed as far as that's concerned. So it now has to go through its final checks and balances going through Parliament, but it seems that it has broad support on both sides of the House, already gone through the House of Lords, so it doesn't seem there's going to be any issues with that going forward. So that sometime this summer, the independent regulator will go live. It will be law that they will be able to go forward. What are they going to do? Well, there's a lot of regulating in terms of the football pyramid and making sure that money gets passed down through the pyramid and making sure we look after grassroots and making sure we look after clubs like Sheffield Wednesday. However, there's also going to be a lot of the regulating of the owners. So whereby the EFL have been left on their own with some powers to be able to regulate bad owners, the independent regulator is effectively a new sheriff in town. So the criticism of the EFL is all they do is dock points. But to be fair to the EFL, all they can do is dock points because they only control the league position. The independent regulator has much more power and will have much more power than the EFL. And they will have power to do things other than just penalise the club. They will be able to target the owners. So in the same scenario as we've just mentioned in the Reading thing, the poster boy for bad ownership has now been taken down. Anytime soon, he will no longer be the owner of Reading. And that leaves a vacancy. So who's going to be the next person that they can target to say, okay, we now have these powers. Who are we going to test these powers out on? We need to find ourselves a recalcitrant owner. We need to find ourselves somebody who is an example of poor ownership within football. Who can we look at? Well, who could we possibly nominate? And I think Mr. Chansiri in this situation has been very, very unlucky because the football regulator has been driven through Parliament by a number of people, but one of the most prominent members that have been driving that forward is the MP, Clive Betts. He was part of the panel that was there to be able to help set up what the regulator should do, and he's certainly been very, very vocal in Parliament in being able to drive that through. Mr. Chansiri is unfortunate because Clive Betts is, of course, a Sheffield-based MP. Yeah. And worse than that, right smack in the middle of Clive Betts' constituency is Hillsborough Stadium. So you couldn't possibly have picked a worse scenario for the independent regulator to go live to have your local MP be anybody else other than Clive Betts. So in terms of that, he's worked very well with the club. He's very much a supporter of the club. He's very, very interested in seeing the club flourish. But in terms of trying to fly under the radar, trying to not make yourself known to the independent regulator, I don't think there's very much chance that that's ever going to happen. The independent regulator are very much looking at bad ownership. And unfortunately, we have just the right person in just the right area to be able to look at our ownership. So in terms of issues and problems that are on the horizon, we've got the safety advisory group looking around the stadium. Very real potential problems there. We've got EFL looking at the accounts, and we've already told them, expect these accounts aren't going to be very good, expect excuses and problems. And then we've got the independent regulator who are looking at football in general and are looking at problems with bad ownership about to go live sometime soon, right in the backyard of the MP who has been driving it further forward. 3 major problems. 4th problem, and I think this is a positive problem. We obviously were discussing in our podcast last time, we wanted fans to be united. We wanted fans to be able to align. We wanted fans to get together and have a conversation around the enough is enough and to put those questions to Mr. Chansiri. That had a tremendous success. People got united. The squabbling amongst fans has subsided. We've seen it in the last day or so with this news. Everybody's singing from the same hymn sheet. The only argument is some people saying, I told you so, and other people saying, well, yeah, I suppose you were right. That's the fullest extent of the argument. All the Sheffield Wednesday fans are united. We want something done. We want change. We're saying enough is enough. So there is going to be tremendous amounts of fan pressure which are going to be brought upon Mr. Chansiri. So your finances, your SAG, your EFL, your independent regulator, your fans saying enough is enough. You've got 5 major things that are putting pressure upon Mr. Chansiri at a time when he's struggling anyway. I don't think that he will be able to do anything else other than buckle under that amount of pressure. I really don't.
Yeah, I mean, I know both me and you broke off in the middle of that, but with all of that, they're kind of laid out again. Bluntly, it does paint a really bleak picture. So you mentioned this.
Sorry for interrupting. The point I'm trying to make is that where previously it was Mr. Chansiri could decide to do something or not do something, he could decide to ignore people or listen. You're in a situation now where it's taken out of his hands. All of those groups that I've been discussing there are ready to act. They have seen the situation and they're going to do something about it. And Mr. Chansiri cannot ignore it. He cannot do nothing. He cannot say, it's my club, you can't do anything about it. Because all of those different aspects are taken out of his hands. Not up to him anymore.
You spoke about supporters uniting behind off the back of kind of like the last podcast and kind of like a large tide turning. There are still people who are online and they're again entitled to their own opinion with regards to the chairman and his running of the club, who are saying, well, he is propping the club up, he is doing this, it's whatever. And again, I don't have any ill will myself towards people who hold that particular viewpoint, and neither do yourself. You've mentioned a number of supporters groups who have come out in the past 24 hours with regards to recent statements. The Sheffield Wednesday Trust came out with quite a strong statement with regards to kind of their stance on the matter. We've seen statements from the armed forces. We've seen statements from the Sheffield Wednesday's Lady Supporters Group as well. This is a difficult question, Simon, because again, I'm really conscious of.
I know what question you're about to ask. You're going to get me in trouble again. I can feel it coming. I know.
I am not trying here to sway anybody's opinion here. Everybody should be able to and should make their own mind up on the matter.
Yes, they should. But they need to know the facts.
Yeah, and that is the whole point of this series of podcasts with me and you, is discussing issues so that people have more information, because knowledge is king, and ultimately being able to then make an informed decision either way. Off the back of it, we've seen a lot of, as I say, kind of like fan groups, I don't want to say mobilizing, but being more active in terms of their statements surrounding reactions to situations that are coming out from the club. For those fans who are looking to potentially think, well, how can I get involved? How can I help back these particular statements? What would be a recommendation for you, from yourself, sorry?
Well, I called upon all the fan groups in the last podcast to have their say. What do you say about the situation? Because to me, and it turns out I was a little bit naive, but I assumed if you were a fan group that you supported fans, that you were there to represent fans' opinion, and that in a time of trouble when fans need to be united and mobilized, and we need to ask questions that need to be asked, that would be the time when the fan groups would step up. That's what I thought. And I've been very disappointed with quite a number, because much as we've asked them to be involved and they've been invited, we get in deafening silence. And it seems to me that some of the fan groups don't really have any great interest in representing the fans. that they have commercial interests. I can see that. They have interest in selling tickets on coaches, selling merchandise, and promoting their own banners and websites and podcasts and those kind of things. I've seen lots of that, and I've absolutely nothing against that. People have got to make a living, no problems at all. But if what you are is a commercial enterprise, then be honest about it. No problem with that. Say, we don't represent fans, we're a commercial enterprise. Just come out and say it. So if you're a member of a fan group and they haven't made any statement at all, they aren't doing anything at all about its current situation, I really think it's an appropriate question to ask them, why not? What are you doing? Where have you been? And why aren't you joining in now? And just my personal opinion, if I was in a fan group that didn't want to support fans at a time when fans need a voice, I don't know why I'd be a part of that group. I don't know what's the point in being a fan group if you aren't doing it. I really genuinely don't. So there has been silence from some, and I've got to say I'm genuinely disappointed because I didn't think that was the case. I thought they would step up. Some of them haven't. I think I can speculate as to why not, but I'm not going to. I would like anybody who's a member and your fan group hasn't stepped up, ask them why. Because, I'd like to know why. And I think if you're paying any sort of subscription, you've every right to ask them why they're not doing it. So, yes, you're right. Some people have come out and made a statement. Sheffield, the supporters trust, Sheffield Wednesday Supporters Trust were ones who reached out to me personally. They got on the phone the day after the last podcast and they said, look, we want to help. We want to get behind this. We heard your call for fans to be aligned. We heard your call for a mandate to be able to represent fans. We would like to be able to find if there's some way that we can give you that mandate and take that on. And I was delighted that they did because, as I'd said to you before, I was also painfully aware that there's a difference between me coming out and speaking on my own behalf and you speaking on behalf of having got a Sheffield Wednesday podcast. Our opinion counts and what we say matters, but does it have real legitimacy in terms of representing fans? I didn't have a mandate to do that, and neither do you, but the Supporters Trust can have a mandate, and they do have that mandate, and they do have a right to ask the questions. So it's much, much better if you could get someone to adopt the questions that we asked in the last podcast. Remember, we said for Mr. Chansiri, we said, show us your plan. And if you can't show us your plan, let us show you our plan and you adopt it. Or if you don't want or you can't do either of the first two options, then you should stand aside. We wanted that question formally asking to Mr. Chansiri in a way that he couldn't just ignore it. Well, the Supporters Trust stepped up and they said, yeah, we will do that for you. We will put that question to you. They asked me to wait a little bit because there was some, they were waiting for confirmation that they'd been invited back on the engagement panel, because the engagement panel is the formal way which you can ask questions to the club. And they were in the process of being invited back on the engagement panel. So they asked me to wait a week or two until that had been confirmed. Well, the club confirmed that, I think it was last Friday, they released the minutes. So they're now on the engagement panel. So we have a green light for them to be able to step up and ask the question on our behalf. And that's one of the things I wanted to be able to ask fans to do, because a lot of people have said to me, all right, what can we do? How can we get behind this? How can we get involved? And this is the way that I would like people to be able to get involved. We need to be able to have a stronger mandate to ask that question as we possibly can get. And the way we can do that is by getting as many fans as possible to ask the Supporters Trust to represent them in asking the question. And the way they can do it is you need to go onto the Supporters Trust website, and I'm hoping you can put a link somewhere on the bottom of the YouTube, and you can put links in when you do it. I'll certainly tweet out a link. I think the Supporters Trust are going to tweet out a statement which includes a link. But I want as many fans as possible to go to the Supporters Trust website and to put your name down. In order to do that, you have to be at the minimum an associate member. But to be an associate member, all you need to provide is your name and an email address. Nothing more than that. It will be private. It won't be passed on to the club. It won't be used to market things. It won't be advertised. You're just simply putting your name down and saying, yes, I would like the Supporters Trust to ask that question to Mr. Chansiri, and I would like you to ask it on my behalf. Now, to do that, we need as many people as possible to sign up. A couple of thousand would be ideal. Now, I think we got 15, 18,000 people watched the last podcast. I think 150,000 people engaged with the tweet that I put out. Thousands of people have liked it and forwarded it. So we can easily manage to get a couple of thousand people go onto the Supporters Trust website and sign up and put their name down for that. That's what I need you to do. So when we go away from this podcast, if you can do that straight away, I'd really appreciate it. If you can put that on social media, put it on the Wednesday Sing, put it on Owls Talk. Owls Talk have reassured me they are not going to delete it. You are welcome to be able to discuss it. The debate is okay. Hopefully Wednesday Sing will do the same thing. I know that it can be put on the other Facebook groups. It certainly can be put out there on Twitter and on other parts of social media. But that's what I want people to be able to do. I need at least a couple of thousand people to do that. Isn't going to cost you any money, isn't going to take you any time, a name and an email address, and then the Supporters Trust will come forward and they will ask you, can we represent you by asking this question? Now, the reason why I'm pleased that it is the Supporters Trust is because they give us absolute legitimacy, because the Supporters Trust are backed by the FSA, which is not the Financial Services Authority, as I mistakenly thought it was originally. It's the Fans Supporters Association. So they are a regulated body, and they are also backed by the EFL. And as I said earlier, they are also members of the engagement panel, which means they have the authority to speak on behalf of the club. That's important, because if we get a mandate to ask the question, Mr. Chansiri cannot then ignore it. He cannot ignore it from a regulation point of view, because we can go to the EFL and say, we asked this question legitimately through the legitimate channel with the Supporters Trust, and he refused to answer. And then the EFL can put pressure upon him to engage with fans in that. So that's important. He can ignore me. He can ignore you. He can ignore people who've put a survey on Owls Talk or a survey on Twitter. He can't ignore the Supporters Trust if we get that mandate. So it's very, very important. We've said before, there's every chance he'll want to ignore us. If we get the Supporters Trust to do it, he can't. We've got the receipts in place. We've done it the right way. We're not protesting. We're doing it the way we're supposed to do. He has to come back to us. He has to answer the question. So that's what I need everyone to do. Go to the Supporters Trust and sign up at the minimum as an associate member. The reason why I'm saying is at the minimum is obviously the Supporters Trust is a charity. If you want to be a full member, you can do so. It only costs a tenner. They don't make a profit out of it. The reason why you have to pay a tenner is because of that's how a trust is set up. You have to make a contribution, then that means you are part of the trust. It's like effectively you're buying shares in the trust, or you have a part of it. You are now a fully paid up member, and therefore you will get full voting rights. So they will be appreciative if you will sign up as a full member, but I'm not making this a sales pitch. I'm not trying to promote people, not trying to take money from people. It's nothing to do with that. If you only want to get them to represent you, an associate membership is perfectly fine. Name and email address will do. But if you feel that you want to support Supporters Trust, it's only a tenner to sign up properly. So that's what I'd like people to do as we go further forward.
And understood, Simon. I think one of the things that I'd just like to just mention off the back of that again, as we said right at the top of this podcast, it is free. You are free as an individual to have your own thoughts and your own opinions on the matter. I think the only thing that I would like to echo there, which you did state, and I just would like to just highlight here again, is if you are one of the people, and I class myself in this bracket, Simon, I'm not going to sit here and lie and say that I don't. Somebody who has been asking the question for a number of years, of being very open about asking the club, what is the plan? I am also aware that, and I've said this before, I am just somebody who sits on a podcast and somebody who is active on Twitter. There is no reason for the club to engage with me. If you are honest about it, whether it be through the Supporters Trust, whether you are somebody who is already affiliated to another supporters group, it is just, as you said, it is just ensuring that you're doing as much as you can from your perspective to ensure that those organizations are representing you to the best of their ability. And that's not a slight at any of those organizations in any way, shape or form. It's just quite simply from the perspective of supporters. We have a number of supporters here who will be listening to this, who will be listening to discussions moving forward surrounding the club, will have an opinion on it. If you are a member of one of those groups, you should be asking the question surrounding that now, because otherwise it becomes somewhat, I don't want to say that those supporters groups are not redundant, they are fantastic things, but it becomes somewhat of a underutilized service that you are signed up for.
I don't feel they've stepped up, but this is the point I'm trying to drive home. The other supporters groups, fantastic as they may well be, they are not full members of the FSA.
Yeah.
Which means they don't have the backing fully of the EFL. And it's the EFL backing I want here. That's the important thing, because we're anticipating this is going to go further. We're anticipating this is going to get to the next stage. And that's why we need the FSA. That's why we need the EFL. And that's why we need them to be part of the engagement panel for Sheffield Wednesday. There is only one group that has FSA full membership, only one group that has access to the EFL in that way, only one group that is also a member of the EP, and that's a supporters trust. And they're the only group who's not making any money out of anything. They're not a commercial enterprise. There's no one person. They're a fully democratic organisation. If you don't like what they do, you sign up to be a member. You can vote them off. You want to be on the board. You can volunteer. It's a fully democratic organisation. You're not going to get on the board of some of the other fan groups. You're not going to get rid of the people who are currently in charge because they own it. You can't do that. Supporters trust, fully democratic, and from what I can see, it's the only one. The other ones may well be democratic, but they're relatively minority interest. You know, armed forces and things. If you're not a member of the armed forces, it's less relevant. If you're not a female, if you're not a member of the LGBT2 community, it's less relevant to you. The supporters trust is an umbrella group that contains everybody. There's no fan who couldn't join the supporters trust. They're not excluding anybody at all. So that's
understood.
It might sound like it's a sales pitch, and I didn't want it to be.
No.
But it's legislative. The reason why we must go through with them, and we want them to take it forward. And I'll be honest with you, they're the ones who said, we're going to drive this forward. We will do this. They're the ones who got most excited. They're the ones that are fully on board. Trust me, they are keen to take this forward. They're as keen as we are. They really want to be able to do this. They aren't going to get fed up of this, and they're not going to be upset about ruffling feathers. They're not bothered about getting any kickbacks or any. They're not bothered about getting a seat in the director's box. They're not bothered about commercial activities. They want the best for the club only.
Yeah, I think the other thing as well, Simon, as you've said there as well, it's a charity. If nothing else, it's charity. Moving on to the last point then. What's next for you, for the group that you're working with, for potentially another lengthy podcast? What's next?
So I've been going in the background and looking at options. Obviously, we've been looking at buyers. We've been looking at various different ideas, and I'm going to be straight up. I'm just simply going to say, because I know people cast doubts upon it, but I'm just simply going to say I've come this far by just calling a spade a spade. I'm taking the finance options seriously. People keep ringing me from venture capital firms and from people who are able to finance things. And they keep ringing me and saying, give us your investment package. And I said to you a fortnight ago, I didn't have one. I'm a little bit embarrassed we didn't. I'm really taking that very seriously. I've got a meeting later on this week, a Zoom call with some people who are interested in financing the club. And I've got an in-person meeting in the middle of next week with a couple of people. A gentleman's coming up from London who's currently in negotiations buying a couple of clubs, and also buying a minority stake in a Premier League club. They're interested in financing it. I had an interview with the Daily Mirror Sport last week, and I made a quote, which I got a bit of stick for, to be honest, where I said that Sheffield Wednesday were a sleeping giant, and they were the last big sleeping giant that was available at a sensible price. And people laughed at me and said, "Oh, yeah, it's not sleeping, it's dead, it's comatose," and that kind of thing. I don't mind a bit of teasing. It's no problem at all. The thing is, it wasn't my quote. I was actually quoting what a gentleman from a venture capital firm in London told me. Mm-hmm. He said that. He rang up and said, we're very interested because Sheffield Wednesday is known in football as a sleeping giant, because it's the best sleeping giant out there. It's the best big club left available. We're very interested. What can we do? Can we sit down? Can we arrange a meeting? Another gentleman that I spoke to, I said, I was very honest about it and said, we're going to need some serious hand holding. And he said, no problem, we'll do it. We'll meet up. So I've got a meeting next week with somebody who is going to hold hands in that sense and talk us through what needs to be done in order to be able to make a legitimate pitch for, 50, 100 million pounds worth of capital to be able to take the club forward. Do I expect that we're going to be able to buy the club in the next 2 or 3 weeks? No, it's a long shot. I'm being honest about it with you. It's a long shot, but it's Wayne Gretzky who said, "Into you miss 100% of the shots you don't take."
Correct. We've
got a shot. We genuinely have got a shot. It's a long shot. It's highly unlikely, but we at least do have a shot. So I'm going to take it. I'm going to take the shot. We're taking it seriously. I'm having meetings. I've got people working in the background. We have documents in place. We have information in place. We're taking this seriously. We want to save our club, and it may just possibly be that we can find someone who wants to finance a fan buyout. Wouldn't that be fantastic if we could do it?
Yeah.
That would be just such an amazing thing if we could. And fans haven't been able to have a fan buyout of a club of our size before. It only tends to be on the small end of the scale. You never know. We might be the first. Let's have a go. It's a possibility. And then the second thing is that in line with that, obviously, I asked the question last time, and I challenged Mr. Chansiri, show us your plan. I think the last couple of days have kind of made that a bit of a moot point. I think that's dead in the water. We're probably not going to see that. And I also challenged other people to step up and show their plans. I think it's probably only fair that I don't exclude myself from that, and I step up. I can't ask people to step up and show plans if I'm not prepared to do that. So if you'll be gracious enough to invite me, I'd like to have another podcast where I have the opportunity to bring some members of our team and we can show you our plan. We said we were going to show Mr. Chansiri the plan. He didn't invite us. Suspected he wouldn't, and he hasn't done. But if you'll invite us, we'd like to show you our plan. We'd like to show you some of the things that we think can be done with our club. We think there are some exciting opportunities. And you never know, there may well be other people out there who come and look at that and say, yeah, that's something we could work with. There's the bare bones of something that's a possibility. Either way, I think it will be interesting for Sheffield Wednesday fans to get together and look at that and talk about it. I think it might make an interesting podcast. So if you'll be gracious enough to invite us, I'd like to come along and share our plans with you.
Absolutely, Simon. See this as a public invite. We would love to have you back on from our perspective, and for any listeners or viewers' perspectives, we would love to have you back on. What we are unable to do at this point in time is to put a time frame on it, but don't worry, we're not trying to leave you hanging for 5-6 months to do so. We are trying to get
we're talking weeks, not months. We need to this needs to be done relatively quickly.
Absolutely. So yeah, no, 100%, Simon. We'd love to have you back on, and
thank you.
I'm really looking. I mean this really nicely, Simon. I'm really looking forward to a podcast where we can sit and discuss potential optimism moving forward and all the great things that could be here. Because I'm aware that
we want to make.
Yeah, exactly. Because me and you have sat here now for the best part of 5 hours, and people who have been listening and watching this have been incredibly patient with the both of us, and sat here for 5 hours listening to. Us pointing out the difficulties or the issues that are persisting with the club, as you said right at the top of this, and I mentioned as well, this wasn't something that was scheduled. This was something that was pulled together over the last 24 hours in terms of a snap podcast, obviously with regards to the news that broke. Yeah, I'm really, really looking forward to having a discussion with you and diving into some of the inner workings of this plan. And I genuinely, I do feel very, very privileged to have the opportunity to do so with yourself, and also again to be able to share this with a wider Sheffield Wednesday fan base, because we haven't had a sharing of a potential club direction or an alternative viewpoint for the last 8-9 years.
No, we haven't. And there needs to be one, doesn't there?
Agreed.
There needs to be one.
Yeah.
So next podcast, 100% positive. All the things we can do to improve it, the way we're going to make our club a massive club again. So people don't laugh at us when we say massive. When we say we're going to make our club great again, that's what we're going to do. We're going to show you how we can do it on. Amazing. Simon, thank you so much for joining us this evening and giving up so much of your time. I hope your phone's been able to recharge, because I'm sure it's ran itself silly into the ground today. Oh, honestly, crazy. Yeah. Crazy. But I've enjoyed it. It's been fun. I'm enjoying it.
Really good. Thank you so much all for listening. Please catch us on the debate show, obviously on Wednesday, to react to anything that you've heard this evening. And myself and James will be back on Sunday with the main show. Please take care all. Have a wonderful evening.